Most people misunderstand empathy. They think an empath is simply someone who is kind, emotional, or sensitive. But empathy is much more than that. An empath notices changes in tone, behavior, and energy that other people often overlook. They pay attention to what is not being said. They sense discomfort before it becomes visible. They frequently carry emotional burdens that do not even belong to them. Because of this, empaths often become the emotional support system for everyone around them. They listen, they forgive, they understand, and they give people second chances long after others would have walked away. This is why many people make a dangerous mistake. They assume the empath will always be there. When someone repeatedly lies, manipulates, dismisses feelings, or takes advantage of kindness, they often believe there will be no consequences. After all, the empath forgave them last time, and the time before that, and the time before that. But what they fail to understand is that empathy has limits. An empath can tolerate pain for a surprisingly long time because they naturally search for explanations. They see the wounded child behind the angry adult. They see insecurity behind arrogance. They see fear behind control. However, understanding someone's behavior does not remove the damage caused by that behavior. Over time, every broken promise leaves a mark. Every act of disrespect creates distance. Every betrayal weakens trust. The empath may remain quiet throughout this process. They may continue showing patience and compassion. From the outside, it appears as though nothing has changed, but internally, something important is happening. They are observing, they are learning, and they are slowly reaching a conclusion. The moment an empath realizes that their kindness is being exploited rather than appreciated, a transformation begins. Many people expect anger. Many expect dramatic confrontation. But that is rarely what happens. The most powerful response from an empath is often withdrawal. Not because they hate you, not because they want revenge, but because they finally recognize that protecting their peace is more important than rescuing someone who refuses to change. This is where regret often begins. The person who took the empath for granted suddenly notices something different. The constant support is gone. The understanding is gone. The emotional safety is gone. The encouragement that once helped them through difficult times is gone. And they discover a painful truth. What they thought was ordinary was actually rare. Genuine empathy is one of the most valuable qualities a person can encounter. It cannot be replaced by charm, status, attention, or temporary affection. When an empath decides to leave emotionally, they often do so after months or even years of trying to make things work. That decision is usually not impulsive. It is the result of countless disappointments, countless conversations, countless opportunities for change. By the time they walk away, they have already exhausted every possible reason to stay. This is why people are often shocked. They say, "I didn't think they would leave." But the empath did not leave suddenly. The signs were there all along. The warnings were there all along. The pain was there all along. It simply went unnoticed because the empath carried it quietly. There is an important lesson here for everyone. Never mistake patience for weakness. Never mistake forgiveness for permission. And never mistake understanding for endless tolerance. Healthy relationships are built on mutual respect. Empathy should inspire appreciation, not exploitation. The strongest people are not always the loudest. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who continues showing kindness despite being hurt. Yet strength also means knowing when enough is enough. An empath's greatest power is not their ability to stay. It is their ability to walk away from what no longer honors their value. And once they fully reclaim their self-respect, they rarely look back. Because they finally understand that saving themselves is just as important as helping others. Empaths absorb more than they express. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of empathy. Many people assume that an empath is simply someone who is emotional, caring, or compassionate. While those qualities are certainly part of the picture, the reality goes much deeper. Empaths are often processing information that never gets spoken out loud. They notice subtle changes in behavior, shifts in mood, hesitation in someone's voice, and emotions hidden behind carefully chosen words. They are constantly reading the emotional environment around them, often without even realizing they are doing it. Because of this heightened awareness, empaths tend to carry far more emotional weight than people realize. When someone close to them is struggling, they don't just observe the pain, they feel it. They may sense anxiety before it is openly admitted, sadness before tears appear, or frustration before an argument begins. This ability to connect deeply with the emotions of others can make them exceptional friends, partners, family members, and listeners. People naturally gravitate toward them because they feel understood and accepted in their presence. What many fail to recognize, however, is that empaths often keep their own struggles hidden. While they are busy helping others process difficult emotions, they rarely receive the same level of support in return. They become so accustomed to being the strong one, the understanding one, and the patient one that they learn to carry their own burdens quietly. Rather than drawing attention to their pain, they frequently minimize it, convincing themselves that someone else needs help more than they do. This tendency can create a dangerous imbalance. Over time, an empath may become emotionally exhausted from confronting, constantly absorbing the feelings, problems, and expectations of those around them. They listen to the complaints, comfort the disappointments, and provide reassurance during moments of uncertainty. Yet much of what they absorb remains invisible to others. People see the calm exterior without recognizing the emotional work happening beneath the surface. Another reason empaths absorb more than they express is their desire to maintain harmony. They often think carefully before speaking because they understand how words can affect people. Rather than reacting impulsively, they may spend hours or even days processing their feelings internally. They consider different perspectives, search for explanations, and try to understand the motivations behind someone's actions. While this thoughtful approach can prevent unnecessary conflict, it can also cause them to suppress emotions that need to be acknowledged and addressed. The challenge for many empaths is learning that understanding someone else's pain does not require carrying it as their own. Compassion is valuable, but healthy boundaries are equally important. An empath who constantly absorbs the emotions of others without taking time to recharge can become overwhelmed, resentful, and emotionally drained. Self-care is not selfish for an empath, it is essential. The truth is that empaths often appear stronger than they feel because they have developed the habit of carrying emotional weight silently. They absorb tension, disappointment, fear, and sadness while continuing to support those around them. But beneath that strength is a human being who also needs understanding, respect, and care. The most emotionally healthy empaths are not the ones who absorb everything without limits. They are the ones who learn when to listen, when to help, and when to protect their own peace. That balance allows their empathy to remain a gift rather than becoming a burden. Repeated disrespect creates emotional exhaustion, especially for individuals who naturally invest deeply in their relationships. Most people can tolerate occasional misunderstandings, mistakes, or moments of insensitivity because no relationship is perfect. However, when disrespect becomes a pattern rather than an exception, it begins to wear down even the strongest emotional foundations. What makes this process particularly damaging is that it often happens gradually. The person experiencing the disrespect may not recognize the full impact at first because they continue giving chances, hoping for improvement, or believing that the behavior will eventually change. Emotional exhaustion rarely arrives all at once. Instead, it develops through a series of small disappointments that accumulate over time. A broken promise here, a dismissive comment there, a lack of appreciation, constant criticism, or repeated dishonesty may seem insignificant when viewed individually. Yet together, they create a steady drain on emotional energy. Each incident sends a message, whether intentional or not, that the person's feelings, efforts, or boundaries are not being valued. Over time, that message becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. People who are naturally empathetic are often especially vulnerable to this cycle. They tend to focus on understanding why someone behaves the way they do, rather than immediately reacting to the behavior itself. They may excuse hurtful actions because they recognize the other person's stress, insecurity, past trauma, or personal struggles. While compassion is an admirable quality, it can sometimes cause individuals to remain in situations that consistently deplete their emotional well-being. Understanding someone's reasons for acting poorly does not erase the impact of their actions. One of the most challenging aspects of repeated disrespect is the emotional confusion it creates. The affected person may constantly question themselves. They wonder if they are being too sensitive, expecting too much, or overreacting. This internal conflict requires emotional energy of its own. Instead of addressing their own needs, they become focused on analyzing the situation, searching for explanations, and hoping that patience will eventually produce change. As this cycle continues, emotional fatigue begins to replace emotional connection. Another consequence of repeated disrespect is the gradual loss of trust. Trust is not usually destroyed by one event, it is weakened by repeated experiences that create uncertainty and disappointment. Every ignored boundary, every broken commitment, and every act of inconsideration chips away at the sense of safety that healthy relationships require. Eventually, the person who once felt secure begins to anticipate hurt rather than support. They become cautious with their emotions, because experience has taught them that vulnerability may not be respected. Emotional exhaustion often manifests in subtle ways. A person may become quieter than usual, less enthusiastic or less willing to engage in conversations that once mattered to them. They may feel mentally drained even when nothing dramatic is happening. Activities and relationships that once brought joy begin to feel like obligations. This is not because they have stopped caring, it is because they have spent so much energy coping with ongoing disappointment that they have little energy left to give. Perhaps the most important thing to understand is that emotional exhaustion is not a sign of weakness. It is a natural response to carrying a burden for too long without relief. Every person has emotional limits, regardless of how patient, understanding, or compassionate they may be. When respect is absent, emotional resources become depleted. Healthy relationships replenish energy through appreciation, trust, and mutual support. Unhealthy relationships consume energy through constant tension, uncertainty, and disregard. Eventually, a person who experiences repeated disrespect reaches a turning point. They realize that continuing to tolerate the same behavior is costing them their peace of mind. At that moment, what may appear to others as sudden distance is often the result of months or years of emotional depletion. The exhaustion did not happen overnight. It was built one disappointment at a time, until preserving emotional well-being became more important than preserving a relationship that continually demanded more than it gave. An empath's silence is often the final warning, yet it is also one of the most overlooked signals in relationships. Many people expect emotional pain to be expressed through arguments, confrontation, or dramatic reactions. They assume that if someone is hurt, they will immediately speak up, demand change, or make their dissatisfaction known. However, empaths often respond differently. Because they naturally seek understanding and harmony, they tend to communicate concerns patiently and repeatedly before reaching a breaking point. By the time silence appears, it is rarely the beginning of a problem, it is often the result of a problem that has existed for a long time. Empaths are generally not quick to give up on people. They invest emotionally, try to understand different perspectives, and often believe that most conflicts can be resolved through communication. When they care about someone, they usually make significant efforts to preserve the relationship. They explain their feelings, express their concerns, and offer opportunities for improvement. They are willing to listen, compromise, and forgive because they recognize that everyone makes mistakes. This willingness to understand others is one of their greatest strengths, but it can also cause them to remain patient long after they have been hurt. Because of this, many people misunderstand what silence means when it finally arrives. They assume the empath is simply taking time to cool down or process emotions. In reality, the silence may represent something much deeper. It often indicates that the empath has become emotionally exhausted from repeating the same concerns without seeing meaningful change. They have reached a point where they no longer believe that additional explanations will make a difference. The energy that was once spent trying to repair the relationship begins to disappear. What makes this silence so significant is that it usually follows numerous attempts at communication. Before becoming quiet, an empath has often given many warnings, though not always in the form people expect. Their warnings may come through honest conversations, expressions of disappointment, requests for respect, or repeated efforts to address unhealthy patterns. These moments are opportunities for growth and repair. However, when those opportunities are ignored, dismissed, or minimized, the empath gradually learns that their words are not producing results. As this realization develops, a shift occurs internally. The empath begins to detach emotionally. They may still be physically present, but the emotional investment that once defined the relationship starts to fade. Conversations become shorter. The desire to explain every feeling diminishes. The willingness to argue for the relationship decreases. This is not necessarily because they care less in that moment. In fact, they may still care deeply. The difference is that they are no longer willing to spend endless energy trying to convince someone to value what should have been valued from the beginning. Silence can also reflect acceptance. After months or even years of trying to understand, support, and communicate, the empath may finally accept that certain people are unwilling or unable to change. This acceptance often brings clarity. Rather than continuing the cycle of disappointment, they begin focusing on protecting their emotional well-being. They stop chasing understanding from those who consistently fail to provide it. They stop seeking validation from those who repeatedly dismiss their needs. One reason this silence is so powerful is that it is often mistaken for weakness when it is actually a form of strength. Choosing not to engage in endless conflict requires self-control and self-awareness. The empath recognizes that not every battle is worth fighting. Sometimes the healthiest decision is not to speak louder but to step back and preserve inner peace. Silence becomes a boundary rather than a punishment. For those on the receiving end, this stage often triggers regret. When the empath was communicating concerns, there were opportunities to listen and respond. When they were expressing hurt, there was still emotional investment in finding a solution. But once silence takes over, it can signal that the relationship has reached a critical point. The person who once fought to keep the connection alive is no longer fighting. They are observing, reflecting, and preparing to move forward. An empath's silence is rarely impulsive. It is usually the final chapter of a long process filled with patience, hope, forgiveness, and repeated attempts to make things work. It represents the moment when words have been exhausted and understanding has reached its limit. Those who recognize the meaning behind that silence may still have an opportunity to change. Those who ignore it often discover too late that the quietest warning was the most important one of all. Boundaries emerge when empathy is abused. This is one of the most important lessons that highly compassionate people eventually learn. Empathy is a beautiful quality because it allows individuals to connect with others on a deeper emotional level. It encourages understanding, patience, forgiveness, and kindness. However, when empathy exists without healthy boundaries, it can become a doorway through which others repeatedly take advantage of a person's goodwill. What begins as generosity can slowly turn into emotional depletion if there are no limits protecting it. Empaths often start from a place of understanding rather than judgment. When someone behaves poorly, they look for the reasons behind the behavior. They consider the person's struggles, fears, insecurities, or past experiences. This ability to see beyond surface actions allows them to offer compassion even in difficult situations. While this perspective can strengthen relationships, it can also create vulnerability when it leads to excusing patterns of harmful behavior. An empath may continue giving chances because they understand why someone is acting a certain way, even when that behavior repeatedly causes pain. The problem arises when others begin to mistake empathy for endless tolerance. They assume the empath will always forgive, always understand, and always remain available regardless of how they are treated. Over time, this assumption can lead to unhealthy dynamics. The empath becomes the person who listens but is rarely heard, who gives but receives little in return, and who supports others while neglecting their own needs. Because they care deeply about maintaining relationships, they may endure far more than they should before recognizing the imbalance. Abused empathy does not always involve obvious manipulation or cruelty. Sometimes it appears in subtle forms. It can be constant emotional dependence without reciprocity. It can be repeated disrespect followed by expectations of immediate forgiveness. It can be a pattern of broken promises, ignored boundaries, or one-sided relationships where the empath is expected to carry the emotional weight for everyone involved. These behaviors may seem small in isolation, but their cumulative effect can be profound. Each experience sends the message that the empath's kindness is expected rather than appreciated. As these experiences accumulate, something begins to change. The empath starts recognizing a distinction between helping and being used. They realize that understanding someone's pain does not require sacrificing their own well-being. They beg to see that compassion and self-respect are not opposites. In fact, true emotional health requires both. This realization marks the beginning of boundaries. Boundaries are often misunderstood as walls designed to keep people out. In reality, healthy boundaries are guidelines that protect emotional, mental, and relational well-being. They define what behaviors are acceptable and what behaviors are not. They communicate that kindness should not be confused with weakness, and that caring for others should not come at the expense of caring for oneself. For an empath, establishing boundaries can feel uncomfortable at first, because it may seem selfish compared to their natural tendency to prioritize others. Yet boundaries are not acts of selfishness, they are acts of responsibility. When empathy has been repeatedly abused, boundaries become necessary for survival. The empath learns to say no without excessive guilt. They stop accepting excuses in place of genuine accountability. They become more selective about where they invest their time, energy, and emotional resources. Rather than constantly trying to rescue people from the consequences of their choices, they allow others to take responsibility for their own lives. This shift does not mean the empath has become cold or uncaring. It means they have learned that compassion is most effective when it is balanced with wisdom. One of the most powerful changes that occurs when boundaries emerge is the restoration of self-worth. The empath begins to understand that their needs matter just as much as anyone else's. They no longer measure their value solely by how much they can give. Instead, they recognize that healthy relationships involve mutual respect, support, and consideration. They learn that it is possible to love people while refusing to tolerate harmful behavior. Ultimately, boundaries are not the end of empathy, they are what protect it. Without boundaries, empathy can become exhaustion. Without boundaries, DNS can become exploitation. But with healthy limits in place, empathy remains a strength rather than a burden. The empath can continue offering understanding and compassion while also preserving their peace, dignity, and emotional health. In this way, boundaries do not diminish empathy, they ensure that it survives. Walking away is not revenge, it is self-preservation. This is a truth that many people struggle to understand, especially when a relationship comes to an end after years of patience, sacrifice, and emotional investment. When someone finally decides to leave a situation that has repeatedly caused them pain, others may interpret the decision as punishment, bitterness, or retaliation. In reality, the choice to walk away is often not about hurting another person at all. It is about protecting what remains of one's emotional well-being before even more damage is done. People who are deeply empathetic rarely abandon relationships without considerable thought. They tend to start, why longer than most? They believe in second chances, personal growth, and the possibility of change. They often see potential in people that others overlook. Because of this, they are willing to work through challenges that would cause many individuals to leave much sooner. They communicate, forgive, encourage, and hope. They invest their energy into understanding problems rather than immediately escaping them. However, there comes a point when patience begins to cost more than it gives. Every person has emotional limits, even those who seem endlessly compassionate. When someone's kindness is repeatedly taken for granted, when their concerns are ignored, or when their efforts are met with continued disrespect, staying can become more harmful than leaving. What once felt like loyalty starts feeling like self-neglect. What once felt like commitment starts feeling like emotional imprisonment. The decision to walk away is often preceded by countless internal battles. The person does not leave because they stopped caring. In many cases, they leave because they cared for too long without receiving the same level of care in return. They replay conversations in their mind. They question whether they tried hard enough. They search for solutions and imagine different outcomes. They carry hope long after evidence suggests that nothing is changing. This process can last months or even years before a final decision is made. One of the biggest misconceptions about self-preservation is that it requires anger. In reality, many people walk away with sadness rather than resentment. They recognize that continuing the relationship would require sacrificing their peace, self-respect, or emotional health. They understand that love alone cannot fix a relationship that lacks mutual effort, respect, and accountability. No matter how deeply someone cares, they cannot single-handedly carry a connection that requires two people to maintain. Self-preservation is not selfish. It is the recognition that your emotional well-being matters. Just as people protect their physical health from ongoing harm, they must also protect their mental and emotional health. Remaining in an environment that constantly drains, diminishes, or devalues a person can have long-lasting consequences. Anxiety, emotional exhaustion, loss of confidence, and chronic stress often develop when someone ignores their own needs for too long. Walking away becomes an act of recovery rather than rejection. There is also a profound difference between revenge and self-preservation. Revenge seeks to cause pain. Self-preservation seeks to stop pain. Revenge focuses on controlling another person's experience. Self-preservation focuses on taking responsibility for one's own well-being. A person seeking revenge remains emotionally attached to the conflict. A person choosing self-preservation is trying to free themselves from it. Their goal is not to make someone suffer, but to create enough distance to heal. Ironica. Ellie. The people who accuse others of abandoning them are sometimes the same people who ignored repeated requests for change. They notice the departure but fail to acknowledge the long period of suffering that came before it. They focus on the final act of leaving, while overlooking the countless moments that made leaving necessary. What appears sudden from the outside is often the result of a slow and painful process that has been unfolding for a very long time. Walking away also creates space for growth. It allows a person to reconnect with their identity, rediscover their confidence, and rebuild the parts of themselves that were neglected. They begin investing energy into their own goals, health, and happiness rather than constantly managing someone else's behavior. They learn that peace is not something that should be sacrificed to maintain a relationship. Instead, peace should be one of the foundations upon which healthy relationships are built. Ultimately, walking away is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of courage. It requires someone to accept difficult truths, release unrealistic expectations, and prioritize their well-being despite the fear of loss. The strongest people are not always the ones who endure endless suffering. Sometimes the strongest people are those who recognize when staying is destroying them and have the courage to choose a healthier path. When empathy is met with repeated hurt, when patience is mistaken for weakness, and when love is continuously taken for granted, walking away is not revenge, it is the necessary act of preserving one's dignity, peace, and emotional survival. The greatest regret comes when genuine care is gone. Many people do not fully appreciate the value of sincere care while they still have it. Human nature often causes us to focus on what is missing rather than what is already present. As a result, the people who consistently offer support, understanding, patience, and loyalty can become easy to overlook. Their sense feels familiar, dependable, and permanent. Because they are always there, others begin to assume they always will be. Unfortunately, this assumption can lead to one of the most painful realizations. A person will ever face the realization that genuine care has disappeared, and it may never return. Genuine care is rare because it cannot be manufactured or forced. It is not based solely on convenience, personal gain, or temporary emotion. It is reflected in the person who checks on you when no one else does, who listens when you need to talk, who celebrates your victories, and who remains supportive during your struggles. Genuine care means someone consistently considers your well-being, even when they receive little recognition for doing so. It is one of the most valuable gifts another person can offer. The tragedy is that people often recognize the value of genuine care only after it is gone. While it is present, they may become distracted by daily routines, personal ambitions, or relationship conflicts. They may take kindness for granted because it seems endlessly available. They assume there will always be another opportunity to apologize, another chance to show appreciation, or another moment to repair the damage caused by neglect. However, every relationship has limits, and every caring person eventually reaches a point where their efforts can no longer compensate for a lack of reciprocity. When someone repeatedly gives without receiving respect, appreciation, or consideration in return, emotional fatigue begins to develop. They may continue caring outwardly, but internally, something starts to change. The enthusiasm that once fueled their efforts slowly fades. The excitement they felt about helping and supporting begins to weaken. They become tired of carrying the emotional weight of a relationship alone. This process is rarely sudden. It happens gradually, through a series of disappointments that accumulate over time. One of the most misunderstood CTs of this transformation is that genuine care does not disappear because the person suddenly becomes cold or uncaring. Instead, it fades because they have reached the limits of what they can endure emotionally. After repeated hurt, neglect, or disregard, they begin redirecting their energy toward healing themselves. They recognize that continuing to pour into a relationship that continually drains them is no longer sustainable. The care that once flowed naturally becomes guarded because experience has taught them that it is not being valued. For the person on the receiving end, the realization often arrives too late. They notice a difference in the relationship. The conversations feel different. The support that once seemed automatic is no longer there. The emotional availability they depended on has diminished. Suddenly, they begin remembering all the moments they overlooked. They recall the sacrifices that were made, the patience that was shown, and the loyalty that was offered. Hat once felt ordinary now appears extraordinary. This is where regret becomes so powerful. Regret is not simply sadness about losing someone. It is the painful awareness that opportunities existed to prevent the loss. It is recognizing that appreciation could have been expressed, respect could have been shown, and changes could have been made. The person understands that the relationship did not end because genuine care was absent. It ended because genuine care was not properly valued while it was present. The absence of genuine care creates a void that is difficult to replace. Many people can provide attention, affection, or companionship, but sincere concern for another person's well-being is much harder to find. Once it is gone, comparisons become inevitable. New relationships may highlight what was lost rather than what has been gained. The person begins to realize that loyalty, patience, and emotional support were not guaranteed qualities but rare gifts that deserved greater appreciation. Perhaps the most important lesson is that genuine care should never be measured by how loudly it announces itself. Often, it appears in small, consistent actions rather than dramatic gestures. It is found in reliability, kindness, understanding, and presence. These qualities may seem ordinary in the moment, but they become priceless when they disappear. By then, the opportunity to acknowledge their value may have already passed. The greatest regret comes when genuine care is gone because its absence reveals what its presence truly meant. People often spend years searching for the very qualities they once ignored. They discover that trust, compassion, loyalty, and sincere concern cannot be easily replaced. And when the person who offered those gifts finally stops giving them, the loss is felt far more deeply than anyone expected. That is why appreciating genuine care while it exists is one of the wisest choices a person can make, because once it is gone, regret cannot bring it back.